So before we begin anything, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that we're in Mi'kma'ki, specifically right here, we're in Kutupuktuk. This is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. The people who have resided on this land for over 8,000 years. It's extremely important in anything we do to keep that in mind and to work, do our actions knowing that we're settlers and we're treaty people. So again, thank you everyone for coming here. Before we start, I also want to remind everyone that the most important thing here today is that we stay safe. That means mask up, social distance, and keep things peaceful. You've got a few masks at the sign-in desk way over there. If you don't have one and you need one, we've also got some hand sanitizer. If you're feeling you need to clean up your hands. So yeah, so feel free to go over there if you need any of that, and stay safe. Cool.
Thanks, Mila. Really important reminders there, so just give everyone space and wear your mask. So we are ACORN. We are a provincial organization for rent control and the rights of low and moderate income tenants. ACORN is also across Canada fighting for rent control, landlord licensing, and decent conditions for renters across this country. And as you all know, we have been in a crisis here with rental costs. People are not affording to be able to leave their parents' home. People are living in homes of 8 or 9 people in one-bedroom apartments. And we have an invisible homeless living in hotels because they cannot find a place to live. The issue has at least finally reached a level where we are now galvanized and organized to fight it, and the government is starting to take notice. So there are a million places that we'd rather be on a Saturday, but we're here because we have to be, because the province refuses to act. Obviously this is a beautiful day, and I'm glad we could have it to fight this, but I wish we didn't have to. Tenants are being forced out of their homes. People are making sacrifices to afford their rent, where they're deciding between essential medication and their rental costs. This should be something the province should be ashamed of. And really, we all need to gather together to help our fellow citizens to deal with these issues. So we know we have a historically low vacancy rate here, lower than most of the country, and landlords know that people are desperate for a place to live. And feeding and exploiting that desperate state that people are for an apartment, they're exploitatively making apartment rents way above what most people here can afford. And we know the minimum wage in this province is also too low, and that is adding to the problem. But we need to tackle issues one at a time, and rent control will help. Thank you. So we are being taken advantage of up till now, but we're here to say no more to that and to fight back. And to let the provincial government know that we will continue to fight this until they step in and do something about it. So we're here today to show the province exactly how much we need this, exactly how much we want it, and then we're going to keep showing up in numbers, having actions, and recruiting members to continue for this fight as long as it takes. Yeah. All right. So we're going to do a little chant to get the spirits high here. So I'm going to read it out to you first. So it's going to be a call and repeat kind of thing. I'm going to go, what do we want? And you're going to go, rent control. And I'm going to say, when do we want it? And you're going to say, now. What do we want?
Rent control.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Rent control.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Rent control.
When do we want it?
Now.
All right, now before I turn it over to our first speaker, I want to do an exercise right now. So put your hand up right now if you are a renter. All right, now keep your hand up if your rent has gone up in the last year. That's still a lot of hands here, that's about half. Now keep your hand up if your rent increase was over $50. All right, still quite a few there. If your hand is raised right now, you've already been served a higher rent increase than you would have gotten if the province had rent control. Yeah. So that just shows you how much we need it. And for those of you who got rent increases of only $50 or less, lucky you. And that was really fortunate, but other people are getting increases like $350. Shame. One of our members, Aiden Tompkins, had a $350 increase. And another member, Grace, who works at the Joe Howe gas station, she had a highly publicized rent increase of $650. Shame. And there are $905 increases, like in the building that Roy Clark lived in Fairview. And I'm sure we've all heard the unfortunate story of what happened there. A man living with disabilities who lost his job due to COVID-19, being evicted from his apartment, and he is now deceased. So this is an unacceptable situation. We're not going to take this anymore, and Acorn is going to continue to fight, and we have been fighting for over a decade for rent control. And now I'm hoping we can have the traction of the crowd and make it happen. Thank you. And we're going to keep fighting because we know the power is with the people. It's with all of you to make it happen. All right, now we got another chant. So it's People United Will Never Be Defeated. So let's do it, guys. People united will never be defeated. 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 All right, I got one more for you. So this one is, our leaders are cowards. The people have the power. Our leaders are cowards. The people have the power. Our leaders are cowards. The people have the power. Our leaders are cowards. The people have the power. All right. Thanks a lot, guys. We're going to move on to our first speaker, who I believe is Pat. So just hold one moment for our next speaker. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Hannah. Well, 50 years ago, I didn't think I'd be standing here today. The reason is, my mother fought for rent control in the 70s, and she won, along with the late Councillor Graham Downey. There's a picture, if you go on Acorn's website, there's a picture of her standing here with a placard that says, United we stand, divided we fall. And rent couldn't go up more than 4% at that time. Then the year she died, 1993, the Liberals under John Savage got rid of rent control.
Shame!
Which is why I'll never vote Liberal. Okay. We need rent control. We need it for not just ourselves, but for the coming generations. Right now, if a family is on low income, if they're minimum wage, social assistance, or whatever, their income is taken up mostly by rent, which means they can't properly feed their families. Kids need proper nutrition. And when all the money's going to rent and then to your light bill, there's no money left to buy food. They can't buy fresh milk, which children need. They can't buy fresh fruit. They can't buy fresh vegetables. So they're stuck eating junk. So they're stuck eating junk like bologna and Kraft Dinner or McDonald's. And their little brains are not going to develop properly. Which means they get to school, they're going to fall behind because they're not going to be able to stay awake, they're not going to be able to concentrate. And what's going to happen? They're going to get discouraged, eventually drop out. And what happens with dropouts? They generally get into crime. So our biggest crime problem is the fact that we have an uncaring government, both in this province and in this country. We need to stand up for the people that can't stand up for themselves as well as ourselves. Right now, this is the 21st century, and people are being pushed back like we're in the 19th century, before we had unions or anything. And that has got to stop. And the only ones that can stop it is us. We got to tell our politicians what we want. We got to get out and vote when it's time. And if our politicians make a promise, we got to call them on it. And that is our right as citizens of this country and this province. I got my notes here, but I'm not sure. That's too much. So people go without food, they go without medication. My own story is, when my marriage broke up a few years back, I moved in with my sister. And then she moved out and I subletted the apartment from her. I'm a diabetic, which means I have to have certain medications and I have to eat properly. And it ended up a choice of one or the other. And so I chose eating, and I still wasn't eating properly because I couldn't afford to get food. So I lost probably 100 pounds in a year, just from not eating properly. Fortunately, I found a roommate, and between the two of us were able to eat fairly decently and keep a roof over our head. But it's still hard. It's getting harder all the time. And these apartments we live in, they're not well kept. We're fighting cockroaches right now. Even though there's an advertisement on the Facebook marketplace for this particular landlord that says they are well-kept buildings. They are not well-kept buildings. My kids, my son-in-law and my daughter, live in the same building, or not the same building, but with the same landlord, one building over. And it took them over 3 years to get their bathroom fixed. The floor was gone. They only had cold water. And yet, the landlord doesn't mind raising their rents. Now, I could go on and on like this, but I think I'll close by paraphrasing Pete Seeger. He had a song called Voting Union. And he says, when one person speaks, they're going to get ignored. But when 1,000 people speaks, they're going to sit down and listen to them. So we've got to unite to beat the system and to bring fairness to this province once again. Thank you very much, and I'll stay safe.
Thank you, Pat. We really do appreciate the decades of activism that you have given this community and the examples that you showed. I'm sure that anyone here has a bad landlord story, has a story about subpar treatment by landlords, and also subpar tenancy conditions. Since I joined Acorn, I have heard truly atrocious stories of the conditions that people are living in and what they're paying for them. It's not true with rentals in Nova Scotia that you get what you pay for. That could not be further from the truth. Now, we've got quite a few people to speak, but I know some people are somewhat new to the cause and want a little bit more information on rent control and what that is. So I just want to go through that. So what rent control would do for us is put a cap on how much landlords can raise the rent for units, both to tenants they already have, but also between tenants. And that's an important note because other provinces have rent control and people like to say it doesn't work, but that's because it's not always run properly or strongly enough. And one of the things that we are proposing for rent control in Nova Scotia is that that cap include vacant apartments so that that cannot be used as an excuse to rent evict people or to raise the rates exponentially in between tenants. Yeah, and new developments can also set their tenants, they can set their rent at whatever they want, you know, if they can find someone to pay it. I think Halifax is a perfect example of all sorts of luxury apartment rentals that are between 40 and 70% empty. So I don't know who these developers are building for, but it's not us. Now, of course, rent control isn't everything we need. Rent control needs to be part of a larger package of rental reforms. We also need landlord licensing to bring accountability to the profession of being a landlord. Yeah, landlords like to talk about how they have a job and a very hard job, but they're not willing to pay licensing fees, take training, or become legitimate in that way. And we would like to see them live up to what they're saying. We also need a full review of the Residential Tenancy Act. I'm sure anyone here who's ever dealt with the Residential Tenancy Acts in court knows how dysfunctional that system is and how it is not fulfilling our needs and is not fighting for the rights of tenants. We're going to come back to some myths about rent control later, but But I'm going to move on to my next speaker, Lena. Lena, come on up. Give her a big round of applause, guys. You'll feel welcome. All right. Give her a minute to come up here, Lena. Stand by. All right, here she is. Thanks, Lena.
All right, I apologize. I'm going to be looking down at my phone quite a bit. I didn't totally plan something to say, so please bear with me. My name is Lena. I work as a housing support worker with a nonprofit, the Halifax Refugee Clinic. The Halifax Refugee Clinic. I'm a housing support worker there. Sorry if you didn't hear that. Thank you. I just want to say that everything that we're talking about, all these changes, first of all, we need to make sure that these are changes that become applicable to everybody regardless of immigration status. There are a lot of people out there. Unfortunately, a lot of the people we work with, they have limited access to things such as public housing because of their immigration status. So believe it or not, refugee claimants are not eligible for public housing. These are newcomers who, might not know as much as people who have been living here longer. So they absolutely should be eligible for such assistance. Most of the people we work with as well are also on income assistance with the province, which is very, very low. On top of it being too low, they also have restrictions on what people can and cannot rent. And usually what they want them to rent is on the higher end. I've also seen a lot of our clients have rent increases while they have unresolved issues with their landlords, including pest issues, plumbing issues, moss or algae, I guess, growing on the walls, and that is it's absolutely unreasonable. Shame on that. On top of that, allow me to look down at my notes. Oh, one thing that I don't think a lot of people know, for all those luxury buildings that are left empty, believe it or not, these landlords, because then when tax season comes along, claim that as losses and still get money for these empty units. So they have no problem leaving it empty. You'd think that would be, that should affect them more negatively, but it does not, because they still get something for it at the end of the year. I guess the last thing I just want to say is once again, regardless of immigration status, we need to make sure that these changes are applicable to everybody, including refugee claimants.
Thank you, Lena. Lena brings really good attention to the crisis that refugees are having here in the city, finding places to live. And any rental reform does need to include all residents, regardless of immigration status. It's a very important point. Lena also brings up a very good point that we do not have a vacancy tax. So there is no reason to lower the rent on these unfilled units for the developers and businesses that own them. We need to create a vacancy tax to encourage them to lower the rent so that people can get into these units so they are not sitting empty. Now, the provincial government claims that rent control stops development. To that I would say they're not developing for us anyway. The rental rates at these buildings do not reflect the income of the average Halifax person or the average Nova Scotian. Any good financial advisor will tell you that no more than 35% of your income should go into housing. In order to afford an average bachelor or one bedroom in these luxury apartments, you would need to be making over $50,000 a year for that to be 35% of your income. And how many of that, how many of us make that? Not a lot. Shame. If there's going to be developments, they need to be built for the people here and the income that they make. Those who are against rent control also like to say that rent control will mean landlords won't do repairs. Well, they don't do them anyway. I'm sure if anybody has a story about getting a prompt repair done, there'll be a handful and no more. What we do know is that there is no accountability for landlords doing repairs now, so I don't know how the situation could get much worse. People also like to say that rent control will stop landlords from making money. Well, first of all, I think we care more about reducing our homeless rate and people having affordable housing, for one. And for two, the average development apartment building pays its own mortgage within 10 years, and after that it is pure profit. So I, for one, think the landlords are making enough money. Now we're going to have another speaker here to talk about their own experience with rental raises and evictions here in the city. David is coming up next. So when you see him coming up, give him a big round of applause, make him feel welcome, and just pause for David. Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you, Hannah. As you said, my name is David, and I went through an issue just this past fall. The unit I was living in did not even meet the minimum housing standards, which is law in this city. I made a report of it, and because of that, my landlord twice tried to evict me because of that. Both times they were unsuccessful, and so their only other option at the end of my lease is they went, hey, we're not renewing it, you have to get out. Turns out the owner of that, who's a millionaire who lives in a giant mansion in BC, wants to renovate it, and I quote him on this, he wants to make it a great place to live for his brothers, who he's giving it to, wouldn't even do repairs when me and my children and my family were there, which is disgusting. It is shameful. And at this point in this city, what we have in terms of housing is becoming a humanitarian crisis because it's affecting thousands and thousands of people, not only in this city, but across the whole province. It's good that the government is finally starting to acknowledge it. Yeah, it's great the government's starting to actually acknowledge it, but what the government has to understand is that we elect them into these positions of power, they work for us, and they need to listen to us as the citizens of this city and this province. They need to enact this rent control. And they need to do it sooner rather than later. This is a problem we have now. It's a solution we need now, not in 5 or 10 years when they actually decide to take a look at it and go, maybe we should do something about this. It needs to happen now. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. Sorry I missed my cue there. All right. So I think we'll get some more chants going. I know everybody loves to chant, and we know them now. So what do we want?
Rent control.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Rent control.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Rent control.
When do we want it?
Now.
I'd like to highlight a few things from David's story that I think are really important. David reported the issues with his buildings, breaking of the M200 bylaws for rental tenancy, and he was punished for that by being evicted. And his landlord and the company that managed his building had so much hubris to their situation that they even wrote in his eviction notice that it was because he called bylaw. So yes, we have a Residential Tenancy Act, but obviously landlords are not enough afraid of it to not just brazenly retaliate against a tenant for exercising their rights. Shame. Shame. Absolutely. Now we have a few other speakers. Just hold one moment and we're going to have Lisa Roberts and Gary Burrell up here to speak. Thank you guys.
What's the certificate of service? What's the certificate of service? Could you answer that question from the floor, first of all?
I'm sorry, I don't have an answer.
You don't have an answer because you don't know how to do tenancy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Roberts. I'm the NDP, the Nova Scotia NDP spokesperson on housing, and I'm the MLA in Halifax Needham. Can people at the back hear me? I'm going to hold it a little bit further away and shout a little bit. Hi.
Hold it closer.
Hold it closer. Okay. Let's see if we got this. COVID makes it extra complicated. COVID also makes renters extra vulnerable. That's the fact. Many of you may know that the Nova Scotia NDP we didn't bring it in, we tabled legislation. We introduced legislation in 2017 to bring rent control back to Nova Scotia. And I want to credit Susan LeBlanc, who maybe is still here or maybe had to go, but Susan represents Dartmouth North. In Dartmouth, between the McDonald Bridge and the McKay Bridge, 80% of the residents are renters. 80%. And the vast majority of housing there are privately owned renters. And those people are renters in privately owned buildings. And every single one of them in a province without any rent control is vulnerable. And it is the job of government to protect people who are vulnerable. That is the job of government. When Stephen McNeil or Chuck Porter say that rent control doesn't work, the right question to ask them is, for whom does it not work? Across Canada, most provinces have some version of rent control. Our legislation is based on the rent control legislation in British Columbia. It has a bunch of different little nuances in it, but basically it recognizes that there is no justification for rent going up 15% when inflation is at 1.5. There just is no justification for that. And in fact, and already today we've heard some of the stories that I'm hearing from across the country and even across the world about how real estate is being treated as a financial asset. It's like you can't hold too many gold bars in your bank account or in your safety deposit box. Some people, not renters, feel that you can't have too many condos in your back pocket or too many multi-unit residential buildings. And that is neoliberal capitalism left unregulated by the government that should have your back. This government should have your back because that is the job of government. I want to say that it's also the job of government, many of you know, in Nova Scotia, it's particularly the job of the provincial government for example, to provide education. Well, I hear from teachers about the impact on students when their families have to move midway through the year because they've had to move because of an increase to their rent. Or this September, I helped a family where their 14-year-old, it was October and he wasn't registered in school yet because they didn't have an address. It's also the job of the provincial government to provide home care. Well, I'm hearing from seniors who once they've paid their rent, they don't have any money for food. How does that work? How does that work? And seniors are one of the vulnerable groups out there because their incomes are not going up. Their incomes are fixed, and many people are in that situation across this province. I've heard for housing support workers, and shout out to any housing support worker here. They really are doing an impossible job. They're doing an impossible job. The government increased the number of housing support workers, but didn't put in rent control and didn't invest in social market housing. How does that work? So we've got housing support workers doing what they have described to me as a soul-crushing job. A soul-crushing job, trying to find apartments for vulnerable Nova Scotians who need support, and they're in the same market as everybody else. They're in the same market as everybody else. I've heard from housing support workers working with victims of domestic violence, where women are choosing to return to environments where they are at physical risk because because they can't find a place to live with their kids. Rent control is the first step. It is not the only step, but it is absolutely necessary. Until we have rent control in Nova Scotia, more investment will come here, which is basically investment that is not going to result in more affordable housing. It's investment that is going to result in greater profit in the pockets of people who already have one or. Rent control will limit the market. It will limit the market. That's okay. We limit the market. We regulate gas prices. We regulate so many different things because we recognize that that is the job of government. Housing is a human right. Housing is a human right. And it's a basic human need. And the Nova Scotia government, under the NDP, would work to defend people's human rights, including with rent control. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And thank you for bringing up some specific examples about how this is affecting people in all walks of life. This isn't just a young person problem, this isn't just a family problem, and it isn't just a seniors problem. There's no group that rents that is not being affected by this. So it's very important to remember. Also, something back to our myths about rent control. One of them is that talking about rental increases across the city, you'll be told that we have an average rental increase of 3%. Well, maybe that's true when you average it out, but what does it mean when some people are having $950 increases and $650 increases? Yeah. The proof is in the pudding and what people are experiencing, and what they're experiencing are rent hikes that are meant to get them out of buildings. They're meant to move them out. And when we talk about who are we building for, there's a lot of people in this city who make minimum wage or very little above them, and people love to use their service. Yeah, people love to get their coffee from their Starbucks, but where do they expect that employee to live? A city needs a diverse population of people, not just for the rich to be able to afford to live in Halifax and the rest of us not. HRM is not just for the rich, and neither should the downtown core or the increasingly gentrified North End be just for the rich. A few more chants, a few new ones. So this is a new one here. No more rent hikes, no more greed. Rent control is what we need. Let's do it together, guys. No more rent hikes, no more greed. Rent control is what we need. No more rent hikes.
No more greed. Rent control is what we need.
No more rent hikes, no more greed. Rent control is what we need. No more rent hikes, no more greed. Rent control is what we need. Awesome, thanks guys. All right, we're gonna have Gary Burrow come up here. Thanks, Gary. Give him a big round of applause.
Last week, reporters asked Premier McNeil, they said, the NDP has brought forward a proposal for rent control to deal with sudden dramatic rent hikes. Why don't you support it? And Premier McNeil said, it's a difference, he said, between us and them of philosophy. It's a philosophical difference, he said. And I thought at the time, that's a pretty weak thing to say about such an important subject, but I've been thinking about it for a week or so. And it seems to me that maybe on this, Stephen McNeil is right. That all of us who are gathered here in support of the important principle behind rent control, we have a different belief. We have a different outlook than the outlook and the belief that the government is speaking from. The current government of Nova Scotia believes that there is nothing wrong whatsoever. They believe there's nothing problematic whatsoever about people being forced out of places where they have lived for decades by sudden, dramatic, unsubstantiated rent increases that have no foundation in anything other than the fact that the market is so tight and the vacancy rate is so low that the landlords know if there'll be lots of people that they can get that $200, $300, $400, $500 a month out of if they can't get it out of the current tenants that they have. So that when those tenants have to pack up and move, because they don't consider anything fundamentally wrong about this, the government of Nova Scotia is not moved. We're moved. And when those people have to look out at where they're going to go to next, and see that there isn't any place for them to go to, the government of Nova Scotia isn't moved, but we here this afternoon are moved. And when there isn't room in their household's budget, no matter how you look at it, from what angle of the compass, to come up with that $200, $300, $400, $500, and so facing the letter that came from the landlord, just a second. When they face that heartache of having to make that unwanted move, the government of our province isn't moved. The government of our province isn't jarred. The government of our province isn't troubled. But every one of us here is moved. Every one of us here is jarred. Every one of us here is troubled because we have a different outlook and we have a different belief. And the different outlook and the different belief that we have can be summarized in one sentence. It is this: housing is a right and rent gouging is a wrong. Will you say it after me? Housing is a right, rent gouging is wrong. 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 So it's a matter, fundamentally, at this level, in fact it's true, of belief. So the current government of Nova Scotia considers it entirely fair and reasonable that a majority of Canadians today live in jurisdictions where they have the benefit of rent protections and rent control, where we in Nova Scotia have no protections from the private market, no rental protections and no control whatsoever. That is their belief. That is their outlook. No problem with that. But we have a different belief and a different outlook. We believe that if it's good enough for the people of British Columbia, why shouldn't it be good enough for the people of Nova Scotia? And we have a belief if it's good enough for the people of Manitoba, where they have rent control, why shouldn't it be good enough for the people of Nova Scotia? And in our belief and outlook, if it's good enough for the people of Ontario, why shouldn't it be good enough for the people of Nova Scotia? And we have the belief and outlook that if it's good enough for the people of Quebec, where they have rent control, why shouldn't it be good enough for us here in the province of Nova Scotia? And we have the belief and outlook as we look across our country, we look in the Maritimes at PEI, and we say if it's good enough for the people of Prince Edward Island where they've got rent control, why shouldn't it be good enough for us here in the province of Nova Scotia? And so we're gathered here this afternoon because we have a different outlook, and we have a different belief. And there's another sentence that we could summarize it in as well, this one sentence: we're good enough for rent protection too. Would you say that after me? We're good enough for rent protection too. We're good enough for rent protection too. We're good enough for rent protection too. My friends, I want to tell you what we believe in the NDP. We believe in the piece of legislation that Lisa Roberts spoke to a couple of minutes ago. A piece of legislation we put on before the House of Assembly to bring about rent control in our province. It's got a name. It's called the Rental Fairness and Affordability Act. And all the Rental Fairness and Affordability Act does is implement legislation by means of saying that rent in our province should be tied to the cost of living. The rent in our province should be tied to inflation. Rent in our province should not be dictated by what is possible for the creative landlords through the market, but the cost of living. And that landlords would be able to apply for additional increases if they have additional extraordinary expenses. But the trouble is, with this piece of legislation that 2 blocks down at the Nova Scotia Legislature, where we have placed the bill for rent control before the House of Assembly of the People of Nova Scotia, the trouble is that there are only 5 MLAs in Nova Scotia today who believe in rent control and who will vote for it. That is the 5 MLAs of the NDP. That the present situation in our province is that there are 46 Liberals and Conservatives who are against the principle of rent control being implemented in our province, and so that piece of legislation has not had the opportunity to become law. But I want to tell you this, that within not very long, a few months, next year, there's going to be an election in our province. And when that election comes, if the NDP has the opportunity to form the government of our province, here's how long it will take for rent control to become part of the laws of Nova Scotia. Moved, seconded, carried. Go get the Lieutenant Governor to sign the bottom of the page. That's what we believe in. Thank you.
I suspect that Gary in his fervor might have been speaking moistly. So just had to sanitize that there. Thank you, Gary. Thank you. And I'm glad that Gary took a moment to highlight how many other provinces have rent control. This isn't a radical idea. We didn't pull it out of nowhere. It is an established state of the way things should be in other provinces, and we are good enough for it. When our premier, soon to be our ex-premier, said that statement about a philosophical difference, I was widely quoted in the press as calling that statement bizarre and insensitive, and I still do. I'm sure a lot of us wish that we could afford to have philosophical chats about rental increases instead of experiencing them like our premier. Must be nice, must be nice. I'm glad it's such an abstract issue for him, but it's not for us. What do we want?
Rent control.
When do we want it?
Now.
All right, everybody, we're going to march to Province House to show the province that we are here and we need rent control now. Please follow the flag bearers there if you're coming down to Province House with us to show the province that we are serious about rent control. Now remember to stay distanced and keep your masks on and be calm and orderly in our walk down to Province House. Thank you all very much.
Rent control! Now! Rent control! Now!
Increase, I wanted to focus on landlord neglect. When I first moved to Halifax, my partner and I, we had a nice little one-bedroom apartment in the South End. The rent was really reasonable. And actually the man who ran the building, he lived in the city and he was actually very kind and helpful. So he was up there in terms of landlords. But then he died, and his son took over. And his son was not local. His son lived in Montreal, kind of treated the building like a burden. And we went from having this wonderfully safe and comfortable little community to a building where superintendents were kind of filed out 1 month to the next, so you never knew who had a key to your unit. I woke up one morning and our front doors were smashed out and there was blood everywhere. The intercoms went down to let people into your unit. We had a couple of fire scares. We actually had a fire in our garbage room, and enough was enough. Eventually we had to move out and go somewhere significantly more expensive just to not feel like we were gonna die. So I think that's a really important component of it as well. I know that landlords like to use things like rent control as an excuse to be neglectful, but that's entirely inappropriate and it should be fucking illegal.
I'd like to add on to the landlord neglect. I've had 3 different landlords in the last 2 years. The first one was great. Then the second one started neglecting the building. There were rats, mice everywhere, black mold. I'm currently dealing with black mold covered, my bathroom covered in black mold. I saw a rat run around in our building recently, and the mouse won't leave. I've been living off of parish to half parish groceries over the last 2 months, and I can't keep up with the grocery costs. I have to eat out because I can't keep anything in my fridge. The company that's on right now recently promised me a new fridge, but lied. The statement of getting a new fridge was never fulfilled. I've texted and called multiple times. There's a huge construction site in our building. It went from renovation to probably demolition, who knows. I woke up with a whole bunch of hammering and drilling into concrete this morning. Can't even enjoy the weekend. I'm overstressed. My short-term memory is completely next to nothing. So landlords need to be responsible, and they need to be held responsible. And if they don't, they need to be fired.
I'm really glad that last speaker brought up about how much this is affecting mental health. If people do not have a place that is safe to live and that they know that they will be in the next month, how does that affect their mental health? The Liberals and the federal government like to talk about how they would like to have a greater focus on mental health and they would like to do something about it. Well, what about people's material conditions? We're also still in a pandemic, and we need the eviction ban back. We don't know when we may have to isolate in our homes again, and you have to have a home where you can do that to be able to. So back in July, the Acorn Tenants Union was here at Province House with 30 families demanding that the eviction ban be continued and not discontinued, and they did not listen. Yeah, but at that time, we promised the Liberals that we would be back, and here we are. Acorn is not an advocacy group. We are a tenants union of low and moderate income tenants. If you'd like to get involved with the fight, join us, continue to show up for these events, because we are going to keep fighting until we get it. So thank you everyone for coming. Make sure you wash your hands, don't litter, get home safely, and we will see you next time.
If you haven't signed the petition, there should be some folks with the petition around. It should be, I think